Two Israeli men who were captured in Hamas's October 7th attack have now been confirmed dead after the terror group released video saying they were killed in Israeli airstrikes. A forum for families of hostages released statements on Tuesday confirming that Yossi Sharabi and Itai Svirsky had died in captivity in Gaza, but they did not say how the men died. The two were kidnapped from the kibbutz Be'eri, one of several communities near Gaza that Hamas and other terrorists overran after breaking through Israel's border defenses. The confirmation of their deaths has reignited the debate on how to get the hostages back to Israel, and our next guest is very much involved in that debate. He was the hostage negotiator who secured the release of Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit in 2011. Joining us now from Israel is Gershon Baskin. Gershon, thank you very much for joining us on Forum Daily.
Thank you.
How has the video released by Hamas and the confirmation of these two deaths changed the calculation for Israel in terms of openness for another exchange?
It doesn't seem to have changed the calculations. It seems very much to me that the government of Israel and the war cabinet are moving forward with the primary aims of the war of dismantling Hamas's ability to govern and to threaten Israel. And the hostages have taken a back seat to the calculations of the Israeli government, maintaining that the military pressure on Hamas is what will bring the hostages home. That's not what I think.
Why is that when you say that's not what you think?
Well, I think that the longer the hostages are in Gaza, the more they are at risk. Today, we learned that the Israeli army recovered another two bodies of hostages in a tunnel. They were recovered days ago, but it was reported today. And we know that the longer the hostages are, the greater the chances are that they are going to be killed, either from Israeli bombing in Gaza or from Hamas murders that are taking place in the tunnels, in the bunkers, in the places where the hostages are being held.
And you wrote for the Times of Israel that the only real path forward here is an all-for-all deal, meaning all of the Palestinian prisoners held in Israel in exchange for all of the hostages. Before we talk about the logistics of that, can you walk us through who exactly are the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails?
There are an estimated 10,000 prisoners in Israeli jails today, Palestinians. Since the war began, in fact, Israel has apparently arrested more than 5,000 people in the West Bank. But the hardcore are 559 Palestinians convicted of murdering Israelis, and another 130 of the Nukhba, the elite Hamas fighting force terrorists who were captured inside of Israel after October 7th. And we know that Israel has rounded up hundreds of Hamas and jihad fighters in Gaza and brought them into Israel. And we're talking about people that come from all the Palestinian factions, Hamas, Jihad, Fatah, Popular Resistance Front, all of the groups. Not all of them are convicted, of course, for killing Israelis. Many of them have been involved in activities of simply belonging to what's defined by Israel as a terrorist organization, or throwing stones, or organizing to attack Israel. Mm-hmm. It is a risk for Israel to release so many prisoners. It is a victory for Hamas to release so many prisoners, and that's dangerous for Israel. It's dangerous for Hamas. It's dangerous for Jordan. It's not good for the whole region. But it is the only way of getting back all the hostages who are still alive.
And so in that danger, we know that in the exchange for Gilad Shalit in 2011, that involved the release of Yahya Sinwar, who is a Hamas leader and considered to be one of the architects of October 7th. How exactly could Israel avoid a scenario where those who are released will simply turn back and either engage in or attempt more acts of terrorism?
First, it's important to recognize that Yahya Sinwar is not the problem. As long as this conflict goes on and the Palestinian people are occupied and living without freedom and dignity under Israel, there will be thousands of Yahya Sinwars. But the way to minimize the risk is to simply recognize the fact that once the hostages are home, Israel can renew the war and rearrest anyone who was released. What kind of guarantees is Israel going to be required to give to a terrorist organization that would prevent it from doing it, which is why I say that Israel should release these prisoners to the West Bank, where they can be monitored, where they're in Israel's backyard, where all the prison authority guards who will be unemployed because the prisons will be emptied can be in charge of monitoring the released prisoners. And needed be, Israel can simply rearrest them, or if any of them are engaged in terrorist activities, Israel can deal with them and prevent them from conducting those terrorist activities.
Gershon, let's say an all-for-all deal is made. The hostages are returned. That's obviously one of the two major priorities for the Israeli government. But what happens next? How is peace ensured between Israel and Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank?
First of all, the peace is not ensured whatsoever. In fact, Israel would have to go back into Gaza and finish the job of dismantling Hamas's ability to threaten Israel and to govern Gaza. We cannot allow for Gaza to continue to be under the rule of Hamas. So Israel will have to do that. I hope that they will do it in a way that will minimize the civilian casualties that we've seen so much of, so much horrendous catastrophes taking place in Gaza today. So that will need to be done. But the second thing that we need to do is change our government in Israel and have a new leadership here and a new leadership in Palestine and an international commitment to move forward to an implementation of the two-state solution. Israel will never have security if the Palestinians don't have freedom and dignity. And the Palestinians will never have freedom and dignity if Israel doesn't have security. This is a deal that has to be made between these two people who share this land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea.
And on that potential for a two-state solution, you've spoken publicly that the Palestinian Authority needs to be reformed and that they need to have an election, but specifically that Marwan Barghouti, who's currently in jail, could be elected president. Who is Marwan Barghouti?
Marwan Barghouti was the head of the Fatah faction within the Palestinian parliament. He was the #1 leader of the Fatah party. He is someone who was engaged with Israelis for years before he was arrested in the Second Intifada. He met with leaders from the Likud, from the Labour Party. He supported then, and he still supports, a two-state negotiated solution with Israel. He is the most popular Palestinian figure in all Palestinian polls over the last 2 decades. He comes out on top of everyone else.
Really quick on that, when you say he supports a two-state solution, are you saying that because you've been able to have conversation with him?
I haven't conversed with him, but we have communicated in writing, and we've been in contact over the last 22 years that he's in prison through his lawyer.
And he is in prison currently for what?
He was convicted of having the responsibility for the death of 5 Israelis and sentenced to 5 life sentences plus 40 years. In other words, he will never in his life be released unless there is a political deal to release him.
And in your view, making that deal with the Israeli government would be a net benefit as opposed to having him released in an exchange with Hamas. Is that correct?
Right. I've long proposed that the Israeli security establishment enter into a dialogue with him in order to ascertain of whether or not he is in fact the Palestinian leader who could lead the Palestinians to peace with Israel. And if that's the case, then Israel should make a deal to release him.
And is his conviction a strong enough argument against coordinating with him in any way? Because I would assume that there would be some in Israel who would not want to bring someone like that into the fold and into the conversation about what happens next.
Of course. So we also have to recognize that Marwan was not convicted for actually killing anyone by himself. He didn't recognize the legitimacy of the court and didn't provide any defense. So there's kind of a mishap about his trial. And we know in similar occasions, Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years, I believe, and considered a terrorist. And he was released and led South Africa to democracy after apartheid. Not that Marwan Barghouti is Nelson Mandela, he's not. He doesn't have the moral code of Nelson Mandela, but he is nonetheless the #1 recognized Palestinian leader that the Palestinian people want.
And would he be a better option in comparison to either the leadership now or whoever else may run in this hypothetical election?
The leadership of the Palestinian Authority today has no legitimacy in the eyes of their own people. Mahmoud Abbas is 87 years old and in the 18th year of a 4-year term. I personally like the man. I think he's a good man, but he doesn't have legitimacy in the eyes of his own people. The last time they had elections was in 2006.
Yeah, and that begs the question of why so long. And that probably further complicates the question. If you haven't had democracy for so long, it begs the question of who can be the person to step up to fill that role if we do get to a scenario where we do have an election.
What is important is when they were planning to have elections in 2021, 86% of the Palestinian people registered to vote in those elections. They took action, and 36 political parties registered to be elected, which is a phenomenal show of a festival of democracy that was taking place, which was cut short because the Americans, the Israelis, and Mahmoud Abbas didn't want to hold those elections.
Gershon, we really appreciate you speaking with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.